Hi, Charlie.
Hello there.
You need to what you'll need to do, mate, is
Hmm.
for these classes is log into the FUB thing, or give me an email so I can make you a co-host or something. But ideally, you need to log in as FUB. I can.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right. If you can, I'll send you an email. Email the details for next week. Then
Yeah,
that'd be
yeah.
great.
And what I'm going to try and do is make you a co-host for now. Make you
Right.
the host, yeah. But
Yep.
yeah, that's why you couldn't get in, because I've set up the waiting room, and it should be automatically recording. So everyone who's here, this is auto
Okay.
recording. And just to stop Charlie having to like deal with all the issues, and it auto records to the cloud in the Zoom account, so it should all be fine. So if you
Oh,
want to,
wonderful.
but it's worth mentioning that at the start as well, Charlie.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
that's why you were stuck outside, because you weren't the host.
I wasn't the host. Right. Right.
You
Okay.
didn't log in as for University Brighton,
I'll
but
do that next week because you don't necessarily want to be on call.
it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'll try
Right.
and make sure I'm around.
Yeah. No, that's fine as long as we're here. Oh, I think people are gradually gathering,
Yeah,
connecting.
yeah. You got a lovely turnout. Oh, that's lots and
Oh,
lots.
look at this.
Yeah, it's very good. Very good. I'm going to make you the host.
Okay.
Then what I'm going to do is log off. But if something happens, Karen's got me on River,
Okay.
so she will just
So
immediately say, "Come back and sort it."
right. I mean, it's recording automatically.
Yeah, top left, you can see it's
I'm
recording.
just saying. Right. So when I want to close it, I just end it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You
Okay.
just
I can
chuck
do that
everyone,
now.
get everyone to go, and then when you close, you'll end the meeting for everybody. Yeah, but
Great.
and everyone else should see the little things. So
The
I'm
little
gonna
things.
slip away. If there's any issues, give us a shout. I'll come
Will
back.
do.
I'm just working on something at the
Okay,
moment.
Matt. Thanks a lot.
No problems.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to an introduction to Nietzsche. Once again on Zoom. Maybe next year we'll be live. I don't know, but Zoom for now. I don't know how many people have read Nietzsche. Some people I know have. Some people probably haven't. So we'll start from scratch. And the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it sort of semi-chronologically, but not completely. I set out a list of 8 kind of titles for each session. And in a sense, this is the way I'm going to go into it, through a particular theme, and use it as a sort of portal to talk about different aspects of Nietzsche. And I will be darting around. I mean, I'll be doing it chronologically to a degree, because I'm going to start with The Birth of Tragedy, which is his first serious major publication, and conclude kind of with Ecce Homo, which is his autobiography, which is the last thing published, the big thing, anyway, last important thing published in his lifetime. There is a collection called The Will to Power, which I'll also be referring to, which was published after his death. And this is extremely controversial, because the initial version of it was compiled by his sister, Elizabeth Foster Nietzsche, who was a Nazi, effectively. So the Nietzsche that came to Hitler came through his sister, who's a very nasty piece of work, and so was her husband, and doesn't really reflect the Nietzsche that would have been in charge of that document had he still been both alive and sane, because in the last 10 years of his life, he was, he went mad, effectively. And there are all kinds of stories that can be told about that, and there are ways into talking about sanity and madness and reason through Nietzsche's own biography, which we'll be coming to during the course of this series. It's unlike a lot of philosophers. Philosophy is curious this way. There are some philosophers and some philosophies, particularly in the analytic school, who really completely separate themselves from biography, from life, effectively, in the sense that a philosopher's life is irrelevant to the business of philosophy itself. Nietzsche wasn't like that at all. For him, his involvement in life and his own biography was very much part of the philosophy he produced. And his arguments vary, and he often contradicts himself. That's one of the first things that needs to be said. But one of his more powerful arguments is that individual biography and the life you lead create a philosophy in a certain way, because the act of creation in life is the same as the act of creation in philosophy. So he's a very creative philosopher, but he's also very disciplined and rigorous. And he frequently comes out with statements which, if isolated, can be taken to mean all kinds of things. And this is why he's been embraced by so many diverse groups, from Hitler's Nazi intellectuals, via Elizabeth Foster Nietzsche, through to the radical left in France in the 60s and 70s, through anarchists, through feminists, And then again, you know, he has a reputation of misogyny, but he was certainly very important to feminism in the later period of his lifetime, and then subsequently again in the 60s for reasons which we will again go into. And there will be a session looking specifically on those kind of things like gender and feminism about, I think it's week 5 in. So there's a lot to cover, but the main thing to grasp at this stage is that there are certain leading ideas that Nietzsche is associated with. And these are the ones that will keep on coming back through the course of the next 8 weeks, with 2 weeks in between, 10 weeks altogether. Eternal recurrence, which I'm going to kick off with. It doesn't actually appear in The Birth of Tragedy, but it's quite important as a sort of starting point, because in some ways it could be argued this is his most important idea. Then perspectivism, the way of looking at the world from different perspectives rather than a single perspective, which, as I express it, sounds fairly straightforward and obvious, but it isn't. Genealogy, a way of looking through the history of philosophy or the history of anything, the history of laughter, the history of madness. It's like history, but not quite. And it's something that's taken up by figures like Michel Foucault in the 60s and 70s and adapted from Nietzsche. The master-slave morality. This is really central to 2 of his texts in particular, Beyond Good and Evil, which is a great title, and The Genealogy of Morality, which has various translated names, On the Genealogy of Morals sometimes, in which he genealogically investigates the origin of the contemporary sense of morals and ethics by genealogically digging back into the history of Judeo-Christianity and the influence of the Greeks and classical thinking in German culture and European culture to try and establish how we ended up with the politics, morality and ethics that we have or had in the 19th century. Nihilism. And in some ways, nihilism is his most important subject. Nihilism can mean various things, but in its most basic sense, it is the belief in nothing. And that in itself, a statement, I believe in nothing, is obviously riddled with its own paradoxes and contradictions, which of course he was aware of, but we'll come to that in due course. In general, nihilism, in popular discourse anyway, is an uncertainty as to whether we can be sure of anything at all. And nihilism as a concept, from Latin for nothing, nihil, derives from a philosopher called Jacobi, who was responding to Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century, and argued with some justification that Kant's philosophy, while brilliant, was incomplete, and it left holes. And one of the holes was an invitation to nihilism, to never knowing with any certainty of any reality whatsoever, to never knowing with any certainty what your principles might be based on, politically, ethically, aesthetically, or in any other way. So there's a nothingness at the heart of German philosophy following Kant, which many other philosophers leap into to create their own systems. This is a period prior to Nietzsche in which Germany is creating its big systems. Philosophers like Kant completely transformed philosophy. He's followed by people like Hegel, with his massive dialectical system, which is a very big influence on Marxism and many other things besides. There is Schelling, there's Feuerbach, there's Schopenhauer, who we'll be coming back to because he was a massive influence on Nietzsche. Schopenhauer built his own system and is known as the philosopher of pessimism. And this is another strand that's very important to the thinking of Nietzsche, the strand in German thinking through the 19th century of Weltschmerz, which means pessimism, a very dark and perhaps quite gloomy view of the way things are in the universe, but it's very rich as well. There's plenty within it that can be drawn from it and adapted to other things. Nihilism is this is the problem that, Kant basically, and this is very reductive, argues that we have access to our sense experience and the parts of our minds that form sense experience into things like understanding and imagination and so on and so forth. But we can't ever access real reality. Real reality is beyond us, because everything that comes in through our the sensory apparatus is turned into something that we can understand. It doesn't actually exist out there. What's out there is inchoate, it's uncertain. Yes, there is something out there, but we don't know what it is. And in doing this, Kant creates German idealism effectively. And German idealism is based on the idea that reality is in our heads, not out there. It's an old idea, and Western philosophy is continually pivoted between these two views of things: the materialist view that there is a world out there that's real, concrete, and the idealist that it's all in your head. Whatever is out there we can't possibly know. And the period prior to Nietzsche is one in which idealism is on the rise because of Kant and because of the whole he leaves through his extremely rigorous and disciplined critical philosophy in his three critiques. And people like Hegel and Schopenhauer and others attempt to fill up. But by the time Nietzsche comes along, there's a kind of move away from that way of looking at things, a return to certain kinds of materialism, a return to the belief that there is something out there and we can grasp it and we can understand it, possibly. So he's part of that thinking. And there's a philosophical commentator called Lange, L-A-N-G-E, who wrote a history of materialism in this period, which is enormously influential on Nietzsche. And Lange draws on, those of you who did The Good Life with me a couple of years ago will recognize Lucretius. Lucretius is very important in the background, the Epicurean philosopher, and one of the first serious major atomists and materialists who does believe in an external reality. Lange is a big influence on Nietzsche, so is Schopenhauer, for various different reasons. And there are a couple of other people in the background to Nietzsche who are important, who I will be returning to at various points in this course. One is the poet Hölderlin, who's not that well known in England or English literary circles, unless you read Heidegger, in which case you may have come across him. And Hölderlin was a poet, famously a poet of madness. He went mad. He celebrated madness. He celebrated insanity. And this whole business about sanity and insanity in a pre-clinical age, in a way, so it's prior to official psychiatry coming along. Insanity is still seen in a rather romantic terms as access to some greater spiritual reality in some ways. And Hölderlin does write extraordinary poetry, certainly, and it captivated Nietzsche in the early days because of its celebration of a very destructive element in the human system, which he referred to as the Dionysian. And I was just going to admit someone. There we go. The Dionysian. And here we come to Dionysus and Apollo, who are two very central characters in the birth of tragedy. So this is part of the background. There are other elements of Nietzsche which I'll be referring to beyond nihilism, a counter to nihilism in affirmation, what we do with this nothingness, how we deal with it, how we live with it. And the death of God, of course, this is something Nietzsche is very famous for, the announcement of the death of God, mostly in the aspect Zarathustra, which we'll be looking at parts of in a couple of weeks. But in various parts of his work, he announces the death of God. And this is another really important aspect of the 19th century, because prior to this, the 18th century sees a change in Europe away from a very theocratic society, a society very much based on the idea of the divine laying down the rules by which we all live and understand the world, to an environment in which atheism is no longer punished and is even acceptable in certain quarters. So by the death of God, he's talking about this whole move away from divine authority towards something else. What that something else is uncertain at this stage, and it's another dimension of nihilism. Up until the point in which people believed, Christians in this case obviously, believed that whatever happens in the world, it's explicable to God. Even if you didn't understand what was going on, even if you felt you'd been thrown into the world and you didn't know what your purpose or function was, you could believe that there was a greater principle up there, an omniscient creator who did understand why you were here and did understand your suffering. Suffering is really central to this, because suffering has always been such an enormous problem for Christian thinkers and theologians. How is it possible that a God who is compassionate and good could allow so much suffering in the world? How is it possible that people who behave well and act well and are good-hearted suffer, while people who act appallingly and cruelly flourish in the world? One of the central problems of Christianity, which goes by the name of theodicy, Theodicy, feeds into this idea of the death of God, because if you eradicate God from the equation, then what is the explanation for suffering? Is there anything? Is it purely random? Is there any purpose to the world in which we live and the existence that we have? He also talks about the will to power, which I'll come to later, the Übermensch, or the Superman, which you may have encountered. which has a very tangled history. And it's not like the Superman of the Marvel comics exactly, but it's a very complex figure, and it's been repeatedly misinterpreted, but that's partly Nietzsche's fault, has to be said. But it is a very important notion of the next phase, and it equates to some aspects of what we would now call transhumanism and or posthumanism in contemporary thinking. He's looking to the next stage after us, to a future creature who is as different from the human as we are from the great apes. Nietzsche accepts the basic ideas of Darwin. He has problems with Darwin, but Darwin's concept of evolution has flooded Europe at this point, the intellectual circles, by the time he's writing in the 1870s. And the whole concept of evolution and natural selection has suggested all kinds of things to various thinkers, and this is something else we'll be looking at further down the line. There are various other things that we will be looking at, but nihilism is absolutely central. And as a way into the birth of tragedy and provide some background, I'm going to talk for a while, and then either when my voice gives out or when I reach a natural point at which I stop, then you talk. This is the basic idea, but interrupt me at any point if you want. This is just a kind of general introduction at this stage. So nihilism, well, I'm going to read you a few things. There's a lot to be said for reading aloud to people, I think, without it being up on a PowerPoint or anything like that. The first is a short statement by Blaise Pascal, who's a philosopher contemporary with Descartes and a mathematician who's mainly gone down in history as possibly the creator of the first calculator, modern calculator, although others have claimed that as well, including Leibniz, and some very important thinking on theories of probability. So he's a mathematical thinker, but he had a nervous breakdown of some kind and started to think a great deal about the meaning of the universe and the kind of things that philosophers of an existential tendency do think about. And this is he wrote a book called Pensées. It's a collection of his thoughts, which is a really beautiful book, actually, and definitely worth having and reading. At one point he says, when I consider the short duration of my life, swallowed up in an eternity before and after, the little space I fill engulfed in the infinite immensities of space, whereof I know nothing, and which know nothing of me, I am terrified. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. Now, as a statement, this is quite important. When he made it in the 17th century, in the 1600s, he's contemporary with Descartes. This is a period in which God does reign supreme in Europe. And any thinker or philosopher who indicates anything which even suggests something atheistic is potentially in trouble. Pascal desperately wants to believe in God, and God will provide him the explanation for this massiveness, this vastness. Remember, this is coinciding with a period in which certain technologies are developing, like lenses. People are using telescopes and microscopes in ways that never happened before, especially in Holland. And telescopes in particular are enabling people to see way out into space in a way they never had before. And combined with the mathematical thinking of the great astronomers like Copernicus, Galileo, and others, a conception of space is changing. The old idea of space is a series of concentric crystal spheres that we're in the middle of, where angels are pushing the spheres around, and this is why planets move. Very beautiful idea. So every angel that pushes a sphere, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, or whatever, also creates a certain note or a section of notes of music, which if you're properly attuned, you can hear, but generally only angels can hear this music, unfortunately. That's one vision of the universe. But when you can see that Jupiter has moons, as Galileo noticed, when you can see that there are things beyond what we thought there were, you become aware of the immensity of space. And it's that immensity and the sense of being lost in this cosmic vastness that is starting to creep into philosophical thinking in Europe in this period, combined with mathematics, which seems to give access to realities out there that no other way of thinking can. Pascal, being a mathematician and a philosopher like Descartes, is exploring these ideas and trying to understand what this immensity means, what's it all about. Certainly there are theologians who are finding ways to argue from God that there are explanations for this, but there's also a great deal of anxiety attached to it. And this is in a sense what Pascal is identifying there. I'm going to give you another example of something quite similar from a much later piece of writing. on the same theme, because I think it brings it into a more technological age. This is after Nietzsche, and it's Vladimir Nabokov, the writer most famous probably for Lolita, which was very controversial when it came out for all kinds of reasons. But he wrote many things and very beautiful things. And this is from his autobiography, Speak Memory. And this is how it opens. The cradle rocks above an abyss, and common sense tells us that our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. Although the two are identical twins, man as a rule views the prenatal abyss with more calm than the one he is heading for, at some 4,500 heartbeats an hour. I know, however, of a young chronophobiac who experienced something like panic when looking for the first time at homemade movies that had been taken a few weeks before his birth. He saw a world that was practically unchanged, the same house, the same people, and then realized that he did not exist there at all and that nobody mourned his absence. He caught a glimpse of his mother waving from an upstairs window, and that unfamiliar gesture disturbed him, as if it were some mysterious farewell. But what particularly frightened him was the sight of a brand new baby carriage standing there on the porch, with the smug, encroaching air of a coffin, even that it was empty, as if, in the reverse course of events, his very bones had disintegrated. I mean, that's to me, that I love his writing anyway, but you know, it expresses something very poetically that is deeply existential because of the technology that is being developed in the 20th century. And this is written what, in the 40s or 50s, I think. The invention of the home movie camera, which probably makes it the 50s. And the awareness, yes, death has always been a problem for humans. Human beings are curious animals. We're apes that think about ourselves. We're divided by our self-awareness. And this is something that permeates The Birth of Tragedy as well. We're aware that we're aware. And we're aware that we're mortal. We're aware that we might not be aware. We are aware that we die. And the consciousness of death haunts philosophy, Western philosophy and Eastern, from the very start. And, you know, some have said that philosophy is perhaps a way of trying to understand death. This is, we'll come to terms with it. And Socrates repeatedly said that. We don't know because he didn't write anything down, but maybe he did. But the other side of it is something else. I mean, theologians had certainly, hang on, two people want to get in, I think everyone's in now, yeah. Thought about thinking about death and thinking about the great absence at the end of time is one thing, but hang on, just two more waiting, wait a sec. Thinking about the other bit, like the bit before we're born, is something else. That's quite different, isn't it? It's quite curious. That's another abyss, and it seems to be equally infinite. And I think both Pascal in spatial terms and Nabokov in temporal terms are identifying the sense of cosmic anxiety that these two awarenesses bring, that are very human awarenesses, that clearly make us human in some way, because it is through attempting to deal with this intellectually as well as instinctively that we create art. And this is ultimately the point that Nietzsche is investigating in The Birth of Tragedy, as German idealists like Hegel and Schopenhauer had in their own way before him. Art says now, is Nietzsche's question in response to nihilism answer the question, why isn't everyone a nihilist? Oh, that's a good question. Why isn't everyone a nihilist? Could it be that some people have more sensitivity than others to the existential uncertainty of the universe? I mean, maybe is that it? Are some people just more sensitive? Nietzsche would say yes, I'm sure. Are we all expected to be in the same situation? Well, there's no, well, I'm arguing very generally about a set of positions rather than a specific position at this particular juncture. Potentially, yes, anyone who's alive will die. So yes, and anyone who exists will be aware of the immensity of space if they think about it, and the endlessness of time if they think about it. But we create mythologies and systems to build ourselves a home, to build ourselves a nest, a metaphysical nest in the midst of this void, according to this way of thinking anyway. But this is like one way. Nihilism is one aspect of it, and it's important to look at both sides of this. Nihilism is one aspect of it. Hang on, just check the chat. The other is suffering, as I mentioned earlier. Someone's got a mic on, I think. I can hear lots of background. Does anyone know who it is? It's one of these curious things that happens on Zoom, isn't it? It doesn't matter. That's right. Good. So yeah, 2 ways into this, right? The third thing I'm going to read before I say, was it 1:30? Right. I'll talk a bit more, then we'll pause. This is from Nietzsche, and in a sense, this is his way into this question, which is unique and extraordinarily influential on, well, pretty much everything that follows him in certain strands of philosophy. He does actually have a big influence on analytic philosophy, even, which surprises some people when they first come to him, because it doesn't seem obvious why he should, but he does. And on Eastern philosophy as well, the way he was been absorbed by certain Japanese Buddhist schools in particular, but also Indian as well. And this is from The Gay Science. It's his first real announcement of eternal recurrence, the doctrine of eternal recurrence, which is replicated again a little later in Zarathustra and elaborated upon. But he asks a question, and this is typical of the way Nietzsche writes. The Birth of Tragedy, it should be said, is the only book of his which has a kind of coherent developmental argument. After that, he gives up that style of writing and writes in short sections, in paragraphs, in aphorisms, in sentences. So he's immensely rich, and you can dive into Nietzsche's books anywhere, in a sense, and still get a lot from it. You don't follow Nietzsche's argument in the way you do with conventional philosophy a lot of the time. Part of the reason for that was he believed that style was central to philosophy, so he was experimenting with style to try and generate new ways of thinking. Part of it was because he suffered terribly from headaches and bad vision, and he found it increasingly difficult to write anything at length. Bear in mind, of course, he's writing by hand, so he's writing in short bursts and relying on friends to help him to write things down when he couldn't do that anymore. So he found the shorter style, the aphoristic style, and the paragraph a much easier way of working. But they do cohere. I mean, this is the strange thing about Nietzsche's work. You can read a book of Nietzsche's from beginning to end, or dip into it, or read it backwards, and things do connect. Or you can look at a very early piece, like The Birth of Tragedy, and then right at the end of his life, The Twilight of the Idols, near the end of his life. And while there has been a development in his thinking, the parts do cohere. It's something about the uniqueness of Nietzsche's ability to bring things together. And I think anybody who's ever engages with Nietzsche for any length of time will probably agree, he is unique in this respect. This is called The Greatest Weight. What if someday or night a demon were to steal after you in your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it. But every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, never have I heard anything more divine. If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and every thing, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight. Or how well disposed would you have to be to become to yourself and to life, to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal. This is what is called in Nietzschean terms the amor fati, the love of fate, the embrace of fate, the embrace of your destiny, no matter what it is. Now, what he seems to be suggesting here is a kind of Groundhog Day scenario in which you're repeating the same thing again and again, not just a day, but a whole lifetime. And it's not stated, and you can project different ways of looking at this, but it could well be that you are aware that you're doing it. But the idea is you have to think, what if? It's a thought experiment. What if it were the case that you were going to have to live this life again and again, from all its high points to all its low points? How would you deal with that? And the reason he's put this forward is because he's trying to find an answer to the question of nihilism. Now, This is when we get into the birth of tragedy for 15 minutes, and then we'll stop for a while, or you can ask questions or whatever, but stop me at any time anyway. The birth of tragedy was written in the middle of the 19th century, more or less, well, the 1860s, 70s, because Nietzsche has become a philologist. Classical philology, the study of classical languages of Greece and Rome, Latin and Greek. Nietzsche is born in the 1840s in a small town in Saxony. His father was a Lutheran priest. He had a complex relationship with his mother, who was, I guess, a characteristically Lutheran bourgeois woman of the period, and his sister, who in later life became a fascist. He went through the school system. He was in the Prussian army for a while. He was invalided out of the Prussian army. He probably visited a brothel at this time and quite possibly caught syphilis. It's never been proved absolutely, but it's often conjectured that this is what led to his eventual breakdown. He had very little sex in his life, if any, apart from that experience. He was a very frustrated man in that respect. He fell in love deeply once in his life to a woman called Lou Salome, who was a great intellectual in her own right, and had different kinds of relationship, though not sexual ones, I think, with the poet Rilke and Sigmund Freud later on as his confidant. But his own personal life was deeply unsatisfying. He was driven, he was passionate, but he was very oddly aesthetic as well, and self-punishing. He went through this experience, was invalided out of the army. He studied at the university in Bonn, and he was clearly quite brilliant at what he was studying, which was mainly languages, philology, the study of the history of languages and genealogy. He ended up getting a professorship at the University of Basel in Switzerland at the age of 24 without having completed his doctorate, which presumably says something about his talents. Yes, Karen.
Charlie, Maria is trying to get
Oh,
in.
is she? Hang on. Oh, yes, I'll find out. Where is she? There. Thank you.
Sorry.
I better make sure I keep an eye on this, because people are hanging around in the waiting room. That's terrible. Right. Oh, she's joining us, I think. Yeah. So yeah, but he was very good. He was very popular initially when he was at the University of Basel with students, and his lectures were very well attended. But during the course of this time in Basel, he became enraptured by the composer Wagner, Richard Wagner. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Wagner's music. Some of you, I'm sure, are. Everybody has probably heard The Ride of the Valkyries at some point, which I put further up on this thread for anyone who wants to listen to it. Wagner's an extraordinary composer and thinker, and his trajectory is really quite odd as well, because he started out as an anarchist, working on the front lines of the anarchic revolutions of 1848 with Bakunin, but he ends up as a radical and vehement anti-Semite and proto-fascist. During the course of this development, he develops a completely new form of music and theatre. I always have trouble pronouncing this word. It's German. Someone might help me here. Gesamtkunstwerk, which means a total work of art. My pronunciation's awful, wasn't it, Helen? Is that right? But this is, it's opera, but it's everything. He wrote the libretto, he wrote the music. He was deeply involved in the stage sets. His operas go on for a very long time, and they become totally dominating. And he was trying to completely reconfigure German culture and create an art form appropriate to modernity. So, for all his appalling politics, he was undoubtedly a brilliant, brilliant artist. And it's kind of interesting in this day and age, seeing ways in which, kind of non-white European artists, Jewish or black, deal with Wagner when they're very big fans of Wagner, but hate his politics. It's the same kind of response that you get with some writers to a horror writer like H.P. Lovecraft, who was also a racist. But Wagner enraptured Nietzsche, because Nietzsche was looking a way out. This question of nihilism had been gnawing away at him for quite a while. He looked at the Greeks. He decided to reconfigure the way the Greeks were understood in German society. There was a very traditional view of classical Greece and Rome as being the highest point of culture, to which Europe should try and, emulate. And this is true in this country as well. The British Empire, so-called, was founded on the ideals of the Roman Empire. British culture was founded on the ideals of Greek culture in the 19th century. This was something that pervaded Northern Europe. Nietzsche didn't see things quite that way. He saw Greek culture prior to philosophy, prior to Socrates, as being a culture immersed in nihilism. The nihilism of which we were talking about, the sense of cosmic emptiness, purposelessness, and the impossibility of human suffering. But the Greeks dealt with it in a very particular way, according to The Birth of Tragedy. They immersed themselves in pain and suffering and created something great out of it, essentially. They immersed themselves in the nihilism and embraced it and created something from it. And through the figures of Dionysus and Apollo, and the character of Silenus, who's mentioned in I think the second or third chapter at the beginning, and then later Socrates, Nietzsche tells a story of how the birth of philosophy, Western philosophy, with Socrates and Plato, was the beginning of the decadence of Western thinking. This was so counter to the German view of the gradual ascension of culture, particularly in Hegel. It was revolutionary. He wrote a book on this basis. Now, in this picture, what we have is early Greeks, pre-philosophy, who personify a certain spirit of order and management in relation to the chaos that threatens the individual, the horror of existence, through the figure of Apollo. Apollo represents light, order, the things we normally associate with the word civilization. Apollo is the god of light. In some senses, he's the god of sobriety. He's the god of prophecy. He's the sun god, or one of them. So Apollo is a way for the early Greeks to think mythologically or symbolically their way out of the horror facing them. That Greek culture had no heaven. They had a kind of hell they called Hades. When you died, you went to a place of shades. There was no redemption after death, no matter what you did. One of the great, or the two great works of early Greek literature by Homer, whoever Homer was, the Odyssey and the Iliad, are very much about this. The Iliad, which is the first extant European literary text, begins with the word rage. And it's about the rage of Achilles, arte, the madness that overtakes the warrior, or wrath in some translations. It's the rage of mortality. It's the rage of no matter how much of a hero you are, and Achilles is one of the great heroes of the Trojan War, things still won't work for you. Achilles at one point visits hell, Hades, for all kinds of reasons, to meet his mother, which is often the reason people go there. And it's a place of shades where people are just disappearing, endlessly repeating the story of their lives to people who aren't listening. It's like a scene in Bedlam. It's horrible. And their sense of fate was equally brutal. Fate is represented by the three fates, the three women. You've possibly seen, there's lots of art about this, and I should put something up if you like. One who spins out the thread, one who weaves it, and one who cuts it. And that's your life, your fate, your mora. And no matter how much you achieve in life, it gets cut off and you're sent to the world of shades. This is brutal. But their way of dealing with that, this is suffering, this is existential horror, is to affirm it. And they affirm it through the character of Dionysus. So you have Apollo on the one hand, who represents light, order, mathematics, framing the day. And then Dionysus on the other, who represents intoxication, madness, suffering, violence. And the cults of Dionysus, which, you know, we know from the archaeological record did exist, were brutal orgiastic blood festivals, effectively. You find the image of the Maenads and the Bacchae are represented in classical Greek drama. The Maenads, who were women who would get very, very drunk and very ecstatic and wear the skins of animals they'd torn apart and tear men apart, you know, and drink their blood and drink wine in celebration of Dionysus. It was that extreme. there are theories they were taking magic mushrooms as well, and it's quite feasible. But Dionysus was a spirit of absolute chaos. And Dionysus was given equal prominence to Apollo in this culture, according to Nietzsche. And the birth of tragedy is the result of the blending of these two forces or principles or figures. Dionysus is chaos. Apollo is order. Not just that, but that at least. Tragedy comes out of, for him, the birth of tragedy comes out of the acceptance of the chaos with the order crafted on top of it. And he sees this in the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles. But then when it comes to the tragedies of Euripides, he sees decadence. We don't need to go into Greek tragedy too much, but there is a kind of movement. The early festivals of Dionysus, where the early tragedies were created, there were festivals for Dionysus. The word tragedy comes from tragoidia, which means goat. It's about goat sacrifice. That's what tragedy is. And each playwright had to produce 3 tragedies and 1 satyr play, so-called. And satyrs are also half goat. They were really into goats, these Greeks, in all kinds of ways. And Dionysus has a lot to do with goats. It does get a bit mixed up, and Nietzsche did get into trouble with some classical philologists about mixing up people who were half horse and half human, like centaurs, and half goat and half human, like satyrs, which may or may not be true. But they must have been very weird. It's so alien to our sensibility, this world. You'd have these day-long or week-long festivals, and one day would be set aside for each playwright. There'd usually be 3 playwrights who would compete for a prize for Dionysus. And they would produce 3 tragedies and 1 satyr play, and then they would be judged and they would get the prize. And the tragedies and the satyr plays were some kind of ritual to enable the amalgamation of the principle, the Apollonian principle and the Dionysian principle to work together, to assuage us of the terror of our lives and give order to it, but also to embrace that terror, not to deny it, not to suppress it. So this is the story Nietzsche is telling in the early stages of the birth of tragedy. This is his rereading of the origin of tragedy. And at one point in I think the second book, he mentions the story of Silenus, which those of you who've read those first pages may recall. If you haven't, have a look at it. Silenus was a kind of satyr in some versions. He was half human and half goat or horse, something like that. But he was also a attendant on Dionysus. And according to the Greek legend, the king Midas, who's famous for turning everything to gold, you may have heard of him, turning everything to gold because he wished for it, and gold, and his wife turned to gold and everything turned to gold and he couldn't eat. But prior to that, he was going hunting and he came across Silenus. And as you did when you encountered a divine figure, like a forest demon back then, he asked him about the mystery of existence. And Silenus's response was, he couldn't tell him initially, but he said, basically, there's no point of existence, but it's better to have never been born at all than to die. And in stating this, he becomes the first anti-natalist, in a sense. His argument that life is suffering, life is terrifying, and to die soon is good, but to never have been born is best. This is deeply pessimistic stuff. And this is what Nietzsche's taking from this idea that tragedy is a form that refuses that nihilism in a way. It affirms it instead. And it affirms it by embracing the Dionysian within us as much as the Apollonian. The development of the argument of the birth of tragedy from there is that when Socrates comes along, he changes it. Everything becomes decadent because he introduces rationality and reason. And rationality and reason certainly has its place. But what happens in history of Greek philosophy is it becomes a kind of suppression of the Dionysian impulse. And the Dionysian impulse doesn't go away. The imperative is still with us. But reason, rationality, scientific thinking, certain kinds of philosophy prevent it from articulating. So what he wants to do in the 19th century, in Germany in particular, but in Europe in general, is he wants to deal with what he sees as the nihilism of 19th century German society. he sees that society sliding once again into nihilism. And the word nihilism is a complex one, which we'll be coming back to over the course of these sessions. But there is a nihilism at the heart of modernity. And the way to address that is to reawaken the Dionysian principle, to reintroduce it, and to reintroduce it in art primarily. And this is where Wagner comes in, because initially he sees Wagner as the one artist who's capable of doing that. Wagner's operas take deep mythological subject matter from Teutonic myth, from Nordic myth, which is very similar to the Greek mythology, but is based on the sword of Northern Europe rather than Southern Europe, and turns them into foundational, originary narratives to describe the identity of the Northern Europeans. So this has both a very powerful cathartic element, it releases energies, but also has the danger of a tendency towards the kind of racism that he's later, anti-Semitism that he's later associated with. But in this early stage, Nietzsche doesn't realize that, I suppose. Later on, he separates from Wagner completely. He has no patience with anti-Semitism for a start, but he also finds it very trivial. And he finds Wagner's ideas on this trivial. He would have been utterly horrified had he known what his sister would end up doing with his work. Hitler, for him, would have been the lowest of the low, effectively. But Hitler didn't see it that way. Well, we'll come to that in due course. In this early stage, in the birth of tragedy, he is putting forward a thesis for the revival of European culture by accepting and getting into those deepest levels of the Dionysian principle within us, and countering the nihilism of the modern age. Now these are broad brushstrokes. Art is the main way to do it at this stage for him. But then as time progresses, so does the Dionysian principle, and that's what we'll be looking at as we travel forwards. But at this stage, that's where he is. Later on, he rejects the birth of tragedy, and the introductory essay that you'll see in the I think both editions I sent you was written much later, and it's a criticism of the birth of tragedy, but some of those strands are still with him right up to the end. So that's the Dionysian Imperative. And I pause there. Anybody else want to say something? Because I've been talking for 15 minutes.
I'd like to say that
Yeah.
I've only read one full-length work by Nietzsche, and it's this one.
This one, right? Yeah.
Funny enough, you gave a choice of translations.
It is.
The one I picked is the one I recognised it instantly as the one I had originally read. So I've read this 40 years ago.
Right.
So a bit hazy on it, but the one thing, I mean, reading it again today, so I can understand what you're saying, that he wants the Dionysian principle to be played out in art somehow, and Wagner is his first kind of choice, and you can see that. You can see how he might find what he's looking for in Wagner.
Right.
I don't really quite see people say, "Oh, well, he embraced the Dionysian principle." In what way did? I mean, how does that present? I mean, he's not suggesting people get drunk and tear people.
Well, yeah, but this is it, isn't it? Is he or not? Yeah. Well, I mean, Nietzsche didn't really behave that way at all. You know, he's like
He's very civilized, isn't he?
he wasn't. Yeah, he was hardly like a member of Motley Crue or something. You know, but I know that's one of the great ironies of Nietzsche in some ways, isn't it? His own life was so frustrated and so constrained and so painful. But I think that's the point of eternal recurrence in a way. Eternal recurrence is about, you know, whatever you end up with, this is it, and this is what you have to celebrate. For him, the Dionysian principle isn't necessarily about rending of the flesh, becoming madly intoxicated. That's certainly the way it's expressed artistically and perhaps ritually, but it's about being able to do that while staying still and doing nothing, if that makes any sense. Like a Zen thing, you know, Dan, maybe. Just as a question, Dan, 40 years apart, are you the same person who read it 40 years ago? And have you changed? And how's your view of this book changed, you think?
I'm not sure my view of the book's changed that much. to be honest. But I've obviously changed immensely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't actually, to begin with, I'm not sure if Nietzsche is a philosopher.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So go on. Why?
He doesn't seem to be doing philosophy so much as doing cultural history, kind of political thinking and sociology, really. It's not, okay, he's pondering existence and trying to think what previous thinkers have made of it all, but he doesn't.
Okay, I mean, you're posing a question. What is philosophy by virtue of saying that he might not be one?
I mean, I read years ago. I happened to be staying with someone and found a book by Gilbert Ryle. I'd never heard of Gilbert Ryle at that time.
Concept of mind, probably.
Sorry?
The concept of mind.
Yeah, it was actually, yeah. It's about the ghost in the machine.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. Now, when I read that, it seems to be a very coherent kind of theory of human understanding that works through.
Right. Okay. I get your point. Now, you're talking about philosophical style there, and that is really important. It's actually something that Ryle wrote about in his early days. He was a lot more radical when he was young than he was later. He was one of the only supporters Heidegger had in this country at one stage, hard to believe, but it's true. But philosophical style is what it's about. And this is what Nietzsche is trying to breach. I mean, now I said Nietzsche, alcohol, and religion exist to enable us to forget the problem of life, which actually that's not very Nietzschean, no, is it? It's actually to embrace the problem of life that you read Nietzsche, not maybe with alcohol, I don't know. But yeah, the question of philosophical style. Philosophical writing has always been under the microscope of philosophers. If you're dealing with concepts as abstract and as rarefied as truth or the kinds of things that philosophers talk about and write about, you've got to be quite precise in your language. Either that, or you've got to do something with language that enables the object of your thinking to be revealed in a different way. I mean, this is really what Nietzsche's playing with, and this is something that actually comes up a lot in French philosophy. The French reception of Nietzsche in the 1960s, in particular 50s, 60s, 70s, was quite a surprise, because Nietzsche had been rejected by large chunks of European thinking at that period because of its connections with Nazism, with a few exceptions like George Bataille and a few others who saw through that and showed that Nietzsche wasn't that person at all. But the French acceptance of Nietzsche was against the background of Descartes. Descartes was the kind of like the grand luminary of French thinking. And Descartes believed in clear and distinct writing, clear and distinct ideas, to write with clarity. And the Cartesian model of philosophical clarity not only dominated French thinking, but also across the board. Not so much in Germany, maybe, but certainly in Britain and Italy and Spain. And this model of clarity was completely undermined by what went on in the 1960s in France, very much because of the reception of Nietzsche by figures like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Gilles Deleuze, Luce Irigaray, Hélène Cixous. These are major figures in French thinking who absorbed Nietzsche and changed their style accordingly. So what did Hitler see in Nietzsche's writing? I'll come to that in a minute. That's a good question. The question of style is crucial, though. Yeah, you're right. He doesn't write like philosophers normally do. That's absolutely right. But then you have to ask yourself, is there still philosophical content in what he's doing? Is he still doing something philosophical with it? And this is a question that Nietzsche constantly poses to himself. He talks about the prison house of language. He describes grammar as being a kind of imprisonment. Grammar is, yeah, go on.
Just ask another question. He's kind of, I suppose he was contemporary with Freud, was he?
No, it's before Freud, but there's a slight crossover, but yeah, not much.
It's interesting. Perhaps, I mean, when I was reading it, I was thinking of kind of, it's very much like.
Yeah, well, yeah, you got your link. Lou Salome, who was the woman that Nietzsche fell in love with when she was a younger woman, ended up being Freud's confidant and told Freud a great deal about Nietzsche. She's the link. So Freud certainly knew Nietzsche, yeah.
Well, I was thinking it's almost like the id and the ego and the id, the Dionysian.
Yep. You're onto something.
Yeah,
Definitely. The issue about Hitler, Helen, I'm going to be doing something further down the line on the relationship between politics and Nietzsche. So I won't say too much, but Hitler got a very specific digest of Nietzsche's sayings, edited in such a way to suit his particular viewpoint, and it is possible to do that. And there was his sister, Nietzsche's sister, who comprised this. She put it together. She gave Hitler things about the blonde beast, which became infamous. Nietzsche does write about the blonde beast. He doesn't mean, blonde Aryans at all. He's writing about something completely different. We'll come to in due course. So it's very selective editing that fed into the whole Nazi myth. Having said that, there are elements of Nietzsche that could be accepted by fascists. But this is also true for anarchists and Marxists as well with Nietzsche. So he's a very complex writer because he doesn't write with that clarity that you're talking about, Dan. Because he plays with language in the way he does, it becomes a kind of hall of mirrors for some readers. Are you reading what you want to read into this? Is there something else going on? So he's asking a very fundamental question about reading itself and about philosophizing itself in those sections. Yeah.
I think what I was saying about alcohol, and I thought Nietzsche was famously against alcohol, as he was.
Well, he did drink. No, he did drink.
Christianity. And thought it was.
He was against Christianity, definitely, but no, he wasn't against alcohol. He did like a drink occasionally.
Oh, so one of his ideas, I think, wasn't it, when he's thinking about nihilism, was not that he was a nihilist, but that people would sort of ask those questions about why am I here, what is the purpose of life, etc. And so he's actually saying, well, there isn't really an answer. There's just lots and lots of systems that have answered that question, with, you said about Plato and things. So he's going back, but still under the Greeks, there is still gods, isn't there? Sort of control and things like that.
Dionysus and Apollo are both gods.
Yeah.
But the question then is, are you literally believing in gods, or are you using them as symbolizing something human? I mean, this is something that happens with Greek culture. What the classicists in Germany at the time are doing is, and they're doing it quite brilliantly considering the limited resources they had then, because we know a lot more now. They were trying to understand how Greek culture developed from its, very mythologically based, ritualistically based origins to the apparent sophistication of democratic Athens, which still had gods but didn't take them very seriously, which viewed reason above all, and democracy and ideas like that, which were revolutionary in the world. So they're trying to work this one out. And everybody's telling a story about what they want that Greece to be, to some degree, and Nietzsche's doing it too. And if you're going to be strictly scholarly about it, he gets some things wrong, and there's a kind of inevitability to that. But it's what's important in a way is not that so much as what he's writing about is the way that European culture is using classical Greece and Rome to justify their worldview and their sense of imperial sway. This is the great age of European imperialism. Nietzsche really doesn't have much time for that, nor does he have any time for nationalism. He sees himself as a European primarily. I'm getting to what he writes about, issues of race later. It's complicated, put it that way, but
he's often thought of as a nihilist, isn't he? When in fact he's the opposite, really. He's
anti-nihilist. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maria says, didn't the Greeks believe the good people went to the Elysian fields, and others thought there was no afterlife? Yeah, I mean, it's really divided. The Elysian fields is an aspect of Greek mythology, but there was no consistency to their attitude toward the afterlife. And the Elysian fields tended to become more of a thing under the Romans than the Greeks. When Aeneas wrote, when Virgil wrote the Aeneid about Aeneas, which is about what happens after the Trojan War, is one warrior called Aeneas sails all the way to what is now Rome and establishes the Roman civilization. And this is, 500-600 years after Plato and Socrates that it's being written about. The Elysian fields become very central to the Aeneid, but it's a minor aspect of Greek mythology. there are many Greek mythologies. There's no one consistent Greek mythology, and there are. Yeah, I mean the idea of that's interesting. I'll look into that in more detail. But yeah, you're right. It's not as big as Hades anyway for them. I suppose it depends what kind of life you got, isn't it? If you have quite a good life, you might think, oh, Elysian Fields makes more sense. Anybody mind? Can we have a pause? I just want to get something to drink.
Someone's got
So,
that.
so it's about 5 past now. So can we resume about 10 minutes? Quarter
Someone's
past?
got their hand up.
What?
Somebody's got their hand
Oh,
up.
I'm looking. Oh, who's got hands up? Stick it up more.
It's,
Marion. Yeah. I can't hear you. You've got your mic on. Off. You're muted.
Sorry.
That's it.
I was
Yeah.
just saying I agree to having a break. Sorry.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Yeah. All right. Have a break. We'll kick off again in about 10 minutes.
okay.
Okay. Great.
What did I miss?
I don't think you missed anything.
I missed the first 20 minutes. What was he on about?
Oh, it was just, if you read the introduction to the text, you didn't miss anything.
Okay.
He just went over that. He just went over that really.
Right.
Made me wish I hadn't bothered reading it actually.
Okay.
So I made a note I'm going to ask him about when he comes back. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
He says, it's from the introduction, and it's on about the Alexandrian culture. a bit of trouble reading my own writing. I'm going quite blind. The Alexandrian culture became a lifeless culture of libraries, curators, and scholars who spent their lives collecting and classifying God, I can't read that. Bloody annoying, actually. So anyway, it kind of seems like quite an attractive idea. He's saying that people should reject that and live in the present full life rather than this Alexandrian notion of everything being ordered and not lifeless, dry and dusty museum sort of culture.
Is it either or?
Exactly. Yeah, I know.
I mean, you can have both.
You can have both. So this is it, isn't it? So you can have Apollo and Dionysus,
Yes.
which I think he's sort of talking about an interplay between those two forces, isn't he?
I don't know, but yeah, you need a balance, don't you?
I mean, he does see it. He poses them as opposites, but then later on, I think he does kind of, there's some sort of interplay between them, I think.
Well, you've got to have both, because if you've got everything superbly ordered all the time, then you've got a sort of Stepford Wives kind of scenario
Yeah.
where everybody's almost robotic.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he's getting at, isn't it?
Whereas if you have no order, then nothing makes much sense. Everybody's mad.
Had you read him before?
Sorry?
Had you read him before?
No,
Right.
I'd heard of him.
How did you get on with it? I mean, what did you think of him?
I haven't yet. I've been too busy, I'm afraid,
Right.
but I will.
Yeah, so it's basically just, I think, I don't suppose you miss that much, but it's just that thing of Apollo, Dionysus.
Okay.
I think you probably heard me ask a question about so, well, I kind of said I didn't think he was really doing philosophy in this book, because he seems more interested in the regeneration of the German culture than he does in the sort of search for higher knowledge or something. Do you think you'll read it when you've got time?
I'll try, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like it's something you want to read, or?
Oh, yes.
I mean, I know you came to some of the classes last time, didn't you, about the Greek?
Yeah, I like the Greeks.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but I'm sort of more interested in the Greeks as told by the Greeks themselves than I am really in Nietzsche's take on them, I think. I don't really like Nietzsche very much, if I'm honest. How are you, Maria?
Oh, I'm okay. I'm
seen
doing
you,
well. Yeah.
I haven't seen you for a long time.
I know.
Have you not been doing classes, or have we just been doing different classes?
I did the British Empire one.
Oh, why? How did I miss that? Is that still going on?
No, it's finished now.
Who was the tutor?
That was Ali.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was good. And then there was Betty's course on utopias and science fiction.
I started that. I just couldn't read the PDFs because my eyes was bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can because you can fit it to the page and then zoom it.
Mm.
Sometimes it's frustrating because, particularly if there's two columns, because you've got to keep moving the bar across. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it was just too frustrating. I didn't have any trouble with this one.
Oh.
It's all in one column.
Yeah, yeah. I can't wait for it to be back to face-to-face classes.
Do you think that'll ever happen?
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
I don't like Zoom very much.
It's good to get to see everyone's sitting rooms or bedrooms or whatever, what they've got on their walls.
Weird. Oh, here he is.
Hello, I'm back. Sort of.
He's moved.
Oh, what?
He's moved.
Moved, have they?
You have on my screen, you were top left.
Oh yeah, but that's like that Zoom, isn't it?
I don't know.
Shove
how
us
it
around.
works.
I don't know why it does that. That's weird, isn't it? Yeah, and there must be a reason for it.
Can I just ask a question about
Yeah,
Zoom?
go on.
Because I had a problem with it because, like I was at a class yesterday, you're supposed to put your hand up, and they can't always see you. But I think there's a way at the bottom, isn't there?
Yeah. Isn't there a little kind of little thumb or something, or am I thinking of the
Oh, is
another
that
one?
just a thumbs up? Is it?
It's on the bottom.
Is it the thumb? Is that indicates putting your hand up?
Where is the thumb or something? Oh, reactions.
Reactions, under reactions at the very bottom.
Oh yeah, there. You got reactions. Yeah, Helen.
I saw the
Just,
thumb.
yeah, got it. Yeah, that's useful. That's easier. It's difficult, kind of attending to all the different things at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless you got many brains or something.
I've got one other question.
Daniel, it's a hands up. It's at the bottom. It's not thumbs up.
Oh yeah, hands up. Hands up. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I see it. Hands up. The little hand.
Oh,
That'll do it.
hands.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Didn't see that yet.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. Actually, that's a really good way of doing it. Yeah. I should know. I've been using another system than Zoom for teaching, so I've forgotten. But yeah,
I've got one more question, which is, at the class yesterday, I noticed there were 3 people who sent me chat messages, but they ended the class so quickly, and I've been paying attention to the lecture. So, and they disappear when the class.
I think you can save them, can't you?
I don't
know.
I've got.
I think you can.
Actually, I've got 21 here already.
I don't know. Yeah, there is a way of saving them. I'll have to look into it. I mean, maybe we should just rejoice in the transient nature of chat. Socrates would have preferred it that way.
So, just can you, when the class finishes, can you just leave it up for a minute?
Yeah.
So I can read these. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
You read through them. Yeah. Then I have to close it because apparently I have to. Right, I'm just going to say a little bit more, and I don't know if you probably got things to say about Socrates and why he's so down on Socrates. And it's not just Socrates, has to be said. Socrates comes to symbolize other things for him, and Plato and Christianity in particular. And one of the many objections he has to Christianity, and we'll see there are a few more over the next few weeks, is the idea of the other world. And this he traces back to Plato as well. I know some of you done the Plato stuff and some of you probably haven't, I don't know. But the fundamental idea that is exemplified in the allegory of the cave, which I'm sure some of you will remember, where there's a bunch of people sitting in a cave facing a wall, there's a fire burning behind them, and then in between them and the fire, people are walking up and down, and all they see are the reflections and the shadows on the wall of the cave. They're not aware of the reality of what's behind them. This is the allegory. And then one day, one of them is released from the chains and goes up out of the cave into the sunlight and is blinded by the sun and sees everything in reality for the first time. And then that individual goes back down in the cave to tell the others about it, and they don't believe it. So that's in essence the allegory of the cave. But what it's meant to be exemplifying is a view Plato's that this world that we inhabit is a lesser version of another world above it. In this case, the world of forms, the world of pure thought, pure ideals, the world of the good, of justice, etc. But there's also a world in which you get your ideal chair and your ideal star and your ideal canopy. It's a curious notion, but this is a reflection or a projection of the real world. And the aim of philosophy for Plato and Socrates is to aspire through questioning, through dialectical thinking, to that real world, to see the sun, to leave the cave and see the sunlight. Now, Nietzsche objects to this because he objects to the whole idea of other worlds beyond this one. And nothing exemplifies that more than Christianity, with its idea of time and eternity, with its idea that there is a realm of God who is eternal. And this is also a realm of saints and heaven and hell and all this sort of thing. And this one, as far as Nietzsche is concerned, there is this world. This is it. He's a materialist in that respect. And he believes that all this talk of other worlds is actually a kind of decadence, and it's a refusal to accept the responsibility for your life. So it is actually a kind of nihilism. And so accordingly, Christianity and Judaism before it, and he was a bit more equivocal about Islam, interestingly. Like a lot of German philosophers, they quite admired Islam for reasons we can possibly go into later. But generally, Christianity and Judaism were no-nos because of this other world, which is just a way of embracing nihilism and refusing to accept responsibility for your own life, however short and however painful it may be. So that is, in essence, is the idea, the Dionysian principle. And he opposes Dionysus to Christ, famously in various aphorisms. What you have with Dionysus and Christ, you have two visions of human suffering, human male suffering. In the case of Christianity, there is a vision of a man being tortured to death on a cross. Whereas in Dionysus is a man who is tearing himself apart, possibly being torn apart, surrounded by followers who tear others apart. Christianity, a vision of a man being tortured to death and followers drink his blood and eat his flesh, whether symbolically or really. Dionysian, they literally tear people apart and smear themselves in blood. I mean, they're both pretty bloody images, but he differentiates the Dionysian from the Christian on the grounds of pity. There is an element of pity in Christianity that he finds very unsettling, and also the promise of this other world. Whereas Dionysus promises nothing but suffering in this world. So from Nietzsche's point of view, it's a more authentic attitude towards suffering. So that's okay. I mean, that's a general picture. I don't know what you think of that, whether that's a fair assessment of Christianity or not. It's quite a big statement to make. And this is one of the reasons he was so very unpopular, of course, amongst Christians. Well, not all of them, actually. Some of them embraced him. You got nothing to say? There is no other world. There is only this one. No? Yeah?
There is no other world. I don't
Yeah.
think there's no world, no. I'm a materialist.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, from the Nietzsche point of view, you know, we're thrown into this world. We don't know why. A big abyss behind us, a big abyss ahead of us, and then we die, and we probably suffer en route as well. That's it. There's no other explanation in infinite space.
That's
I mean,
shit.
yeah, I mean, this is for Nietzsche, this is counter nihilism because it's confronting the void rather than running away from it. So it's more authentic, and this is one of the reasons, along with Kierkegaard, who some of you I think have read, he becomes the founder of existentialism much later on.
You confused me.
Yeah.
You said previously that he wanted to. He didn't like the nihilism that crept into society.
It's counter nihilism. He was against nihilism. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you just said the opposite.
No. He's against nihilism. For him, nihilism is running away to an imaginary other world. That's how he perceives it.
Yeah.
To imagine you're going to get some kind of justice in the afterlife, or there is a God who will make it all right in the end. For him, that's nihilism. He sees it as coming from weakness, and it's the attitude of what he calls the last man, and he sometimes calls it decadence. And he does tend to see people running to belief systems away from the the beautiful horror at the center of life as he perceives it, the Dionysian, it's all a form of nihilism. And this is true sometimes when he's talking about democracy as well. He changes his viewpoint on democracy and socialism and various other things, and science. But he identifies nihilism as a running away from this immanence in one form or another. And it's not always consistent, has to be said.
He can't make his mind up, can he?
No, it's not that. He's creative in engaging with the thought of it. So he'll introduce the thought of the death of God, for example, or eternal recurrence, and then he'll jab away at it and play with it to try and get a different angle on it. This is perspectivism. So it's not necessarily self-contradiction in his case, because he's not aiming for that kind of consistency in quite that way. Or he is sometimes, but sometimes he isn't. Yeah, but there you go.
You might be aware that some of us did. Matt Lee just did a course recently about Nietzsche.
Did he? I didn't know that. Okay. Was it different to this one?
It wasn't Birth of Tragedy. It was something else.
Well, you can do a lot of courses on Nietzsche. There's a lot to be said about Nietzsche.
Something that came up on the course.
Well, he did a course a while back on Kierkegaard. I sat in on Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are sort of parallels because they come in the same period. They both rebel against Hegel and the great idealist philosophies, and you know, they have both have a very unique way of thinking, which was a massive influence on those who followed. But the difference, of course, being Kierkegaard was a Christian, whereas Nietzsche most definitely wasn't.
So something that I brought up on the course with Matt is that he thought that he would be known as the greatest philosopher of all time, possibly. There would be, in Matt's words, there'd be a before Nietzsche and after Nietzsche. It was like a crux, you know. And it seems to me that people often talk about his the ambiguity, apart from the fact that he does seem to shift position throughout his quite short life. He does shift position, but also the ambiguity that is within most of his work. So it's like, does he want to, you know, have his cake and eat it, kind of?
No, I think, well, yes and no. I mean, we'll do some stuff on Nietzsche and language next week, and I think it's actually quite important to really drill down a bit on why he phrases things the way he does. This whole thing about being the philosopher of the future, he talks a lot about being the philosopher of the 20th century, and in many ways he was, because he did predict the great totalitarianisms fairly directly, really, and he also, you could argue, predicted the stuff we now call postmodernism and posthumanism. So in a sense, whether he's the greatest or not is another issue. And also you need to bear in mind always that he was cracking up quite badly in the later years of his life, from about, I don't know, 89 till he died in 1900. So about 10 years, last 10 years of his life, he was increasingly schizophrenic, and there were elements of megalomania that flew out sometimes. There's no doubt about it. He had a collapse in this place, Sils Maria, which famously the dancer Nijinsky also went mad in, but he flipped. He saw a horse being beaten. He went and embraced the horse, and that was the point at which he didn't come back. It's quite a famous scene in Nietzsche's life. And that was when Elizabeth Nietzsche returned from her adventures in Patagonia. I'll just tell you briefly. I mean, but Elizabeth Nietzsche was very ambivalent about her brother. She believed he was the greatest genius in Germany for a long time, and then turned against him when he turned against anti-Semitism, because she was becoming increasingly anti-Semitic, and he would have nothing to do with it. And she ended up going off with this guy called Forster, who was one of the founders of the German Nazi Party, who set up a colony in Patagonia in South America, in Argentina, to breed pure German stock. Bizarre. It was a complete failure, you know, and it was dreadful. And she came home from this total misadventure, wondering what the hell to do. And in the meantime, Nietzsche, her brother, had become more famous. So she decided to take over. And at this point, he'd also broken down. He wasn't really coherent anymore. So she looked after him, managed his affairs, managed his writings, and eventually funneled certain of the writings, very carefully edited, in the direction of the fascists. So, but a lot of that, some of the late stuff, you can see it with Ecce Homo. It's coherent, but every now and then you see flashes of something that's a little bit crazy. You know, he did say things like, I am dynamite.
I am dynamite.
I am dynamite. It's the name of the best, I think probably the best biography of Nietzsche. It came out quite recently by Sue Priedel, and I've been listening to it on Audible, which is a great way to listen to it. But yeah, he did say that, but that was in response to a review which said he was dynamite. So it wasn't as megalomaniac as it might sound, but he did come out with things that sound quite megalomaniac towards the end. Yeah.
Where did you get that?
What?
Where did you get the audio?
Audible. Yeah, you just download it. You know, can put it on your phone or something. It's an app, and then you can buy. It's Amazon, I'm afraid.
Audible.
Audible is called, yeah. So you get a book, you can get a book in Kindle, and then you get an Audible, listen to it, read by someone with the same name as the author or whatever. It's very, but it's quite useful sometimes. If you're going for a walk, you can read Nietzsche at the same time. But, yeah.
I made a note.
Sorry, what, Dan?
I made a note.
Good.
I'm telling Maria about it in the break.
Right. Okay. So any other thoughts on this issue of the other world, and what are your feelings about this idea? I mean, is it a basis for philosophy? Is it a sound materialism? There are other kinds of materialism. I mean, Marx came up with something that was materialist as well, but not at all like Nietzsche. And this is the weird thing, as we'll see later, the blending of Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud in the 60s is quite extraordinary. Would have been inconceivable 50 years before, but that's effectively what created what came to be known as post-structuralism. Three enormously important thinkers, to which I think I tend to add Charles Darwin and Ada Lovelace, who are equally important for different reasons. But Marxist materialism, was Freud a materialist? Well, maybe not. Maybe he was. I think you're. Go on, Maria. Yeah.
I was just going. You just mentioned Darwin. I was going to ask if Nietzsche had taken into account evolution into account.
Yeah, he had. Yeah, when he was at the late stage of his intellectual development, Darwin was all the rage in Germany in the 1870s, and his best friend for quite a while, who was also Jewish, which is one of the reasons that he fell out with Wagner, and his sister Paul Ray was one of the greatest advocates for Darwin, and he absorbed a great deal of Darwinian thinking through Paul Ray. And the famous picture of Lou Salome and Nietzsche and Paul Ray with Lou Salome holding a whip, I think somebody posted that a while back. It can be reposted. It's really famous for all kinds of reasons, because it's so interesting considering the accusations of misogyny. But yeah, he did. And he absorbed Darwin, and his position towards Darwin changed and flickered around all over the place. He accepted the basic premise of natural selection, but he was very uncertain about the way it was being used, and probably with some justification, because one use of Darwin became known as social Darwinism in the hands of this guy Herbert Spencer, who was a contemporary, which also led into Nazism as well. That wasn't why Nietzsche objected to it, because of course Nazism didn't exist then, but Darwinism was very unsettled and inchoate in that period. It wasn't as clear-cut as it possibly seems now. Clearly there are plenty of people who disagree with it and reject it completely to this day, and there are plenty of arguments about the finer details of Darwin's theory, but in general the scientific community accepts natural selection as one of the most reliable scientific laws, along with quantum mechanics and thermodynamics, entropy. But then it wasn't. It was a narrative that was still being tossed around all over the place. So it was a cultural thing. I'm trying to think of something equivalent today. I can't think of anything that really works in quite the same way. It was such a big idea. For thousands of years, people had assumed that people were different to other animals, and suddenly, he's not the first to say it, but he's the first to, categorize it and formalize it. We were descended from the same origins as apes and chimpanzees, and people were horrified by that.
Do you think that we'll ever return to the idea of other worlds, or do you think now that there's been quite a lot of materialist prominent thinkers that we're kind of just heading more towards materialism and expanding on that.
Well, I think it's got very complicated because of what's happened in physics. The kind of materialism that was around in the 19th century seems is often called vulgar materialism. It seems too simplistic, because let's face it, we can be materialist, we can be a realist materialist and believe there is real stuff out there. We could be a different kind of materialist and only believe what we see, sort of like a hardcore empirical materialist, and that would be just stupid, because I know this table, philosophers love to talk about tables, as I'm sure you realize. This table is real as far as I'm concerned. It's what my laptop is sitting on. But I also know it's made up of molecules and atoms and compounds and elements. And beneath that, subatomic particles zipping around, quarks. 10 billion neutrinos are passing through my thumbnail every second. This is a material universe I have absolutely no access to. And not only that, in relation to other worlds, we're also living in an age in which the concept of the multiverse is becoming increasingly accepted, that, you know, this is one universe among infinite universes. So yeah, there are other worlds, and you know, if you take that literally, then it's quite feasible. There is another world which does have Elysian fields, another universe that does have a real Hades. Statistically and in terms of probability, they do exist.
What about other worlds on this in this world, like multiple worlds in existing within this one?
Like what? Like I don't know. What, you like another dimension? You mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, like, because there's a lot of kind of crossover now between science and spirituality in thinking, and I'm just wondering in where the side of spirituality is coming in, because it's been heavily scientific thinking, and it's just recently that the two are starting to kind of coincide with each other, and I was just wondering in terms of, like, you know, our experiences of the world and in like the spirituality that's involved within that, how that's coming into fruition.
Well, I mean, it's not inconceivable that you could have a Nietzschean shamanism, you know, and I mean, shamanism is an example of that, where people travel to other worlds through changes of consciousness, often, you know, whether through drumming or chanting or drugs or whatever. So there is that aspect of, like, the perceptual aspect of other worlds, which doesn't necessarily contradict the materialism of Nietzsche, because it's about perception of reality rather than accepting that there is a reality out there. I mean, it may well be that our consciousness is too limited to grasp these other worlds, as it were, that are right on our doorstep, and that is not unfeasible, and that doesn't necessarily contradict materialism in a more extended sense. You know, the really vulgar materialism, it probably would, because they just wouldn't believe it, but it's not something Nietzsche would have been interested in at that particular period. But there's no reason why you couldn't take some of Nietzsche's ideas into that, central being the idea of eternal recurrence, because one of the curious things about eternal recurrence, and I'll go back to this later in the course, is it almost does indicate the possibility of the multiverse. Like, the multiverse isn't necessarily not in our world. It's quite feasible in some versions of that theory that there might be a universe on the end of my finger, you know, which some people can breach that universe and some people can't, in some people's view. But that doesn't necessarily contradict materialism, if that helps at all. I don't know if it does, but yeah, I mean, this is a whole other area, probably slightly outside the Nietzschean one, but in eternal recurrence, anything that can possibly happen at any time will happen, has happened, and will happen again. So that means that if you had an experience of suddenly breaching another world, like, you know, like in Harry Potter, or, you know, fairy tale way, within the realms of eternal recurrence, is not completely inconceivable. It's not something that Nietzscheans would tend to focus on, but yeah, it's not impossible. But then there's a question of what you say about it, obviously. Yeah,
so
I think
what he talks about in terms of like the kind of limits of the Socratic view of the world, and the kind of the theoretical man. Now that kind of you get to the limits of kind of like scientific, I don't know what it be, scientific knowledge, I guess.
Yeah.
And then that's when you have to enter in the kind of realm of art.
Yeah.
But to explain it.
He kind of accepts when he's writing about the pre-Socratics, which he does at various points in his life, the people before Socrates, the philosophers like Heraclitus and Empedocles and so on. He configures a world in which there's a gradual separation of the philosopher, the scientist, and the artist. And this is absolutely right. So the scientist is someone who measures everything and tries to quantify stuff. That's what scientists do. They try and work out the mechanics of existence. A philosopher is someone who asks questions about the meaning of it, or the cause of it, or the origin or the ending of it. An artist is someone who actually creates it. So, you know, in this sense, every artist creates another world, but it's also this world. So, yeah, I mean, the artist is, to some extent, like a visionary or a seer, in a way. And Zarathustra is partly about that. His character of Zarathustra is perhaps partly autobiographical and based on the founder of the Zoroastrian religion, which preceded Judaism even. It's the oldest quasi-monotheistic, although it's dualist religion in the world, I think, yeah. So Zarathustra is a visionary who comes down to earth and, in a sense, constructs universes, I suppose you could say that. Yeah, the point of it being a certain kind of philosopher artist is to create a new world from the material of this world. It isn't to breach another world that someone else has created, it's to create one yourself. That's what to be an artist is, in those terms. Dionysian artist, anyway. Dan. And then Sam. Yeah.
I mentioned that we recently did a course with Matt.
Yeah.
I decided to write an essay. I've not written about philosophy before. But one of the choices of the topic is beyond good and evil in a non-moral sense. Good and evil in a non-moral sense, I think it is.
Truth and lies in a non-moral sense, maybe, or beyond good and evil, one of the two.
No, it is, yeah, you're right, it's truth and lies.
Yeah.
And so I say I'm writing it, but I haven't actually written anything yet. I've just been thinking about it. But I think what troubles me about Nietzsche is I don't get any sense that, I mean, okay, I don't believe in God. I was brought up Catholic, don't believe in God, but I still believe in right and wrong.
Right.
I find that hard to shape these principles. I think the Ten Commandments broadly are quite good. And so I don't, Nietzsche doesn't, perhaps that's why I don't really, I mean, how does he must surely have some kind of morality in his thinking.
Some kind of what? Some kind of what, Dan?
He doesn't seem to admit of morality, does he?
Oh, no, well, morality is a subject of a considerable amount of his thinking. So it's not that he doesn't admit it, but he's not giving you an ethics to work with, you know. No, he's trying to dismantle it. Doesn't mean he's not capable of doing that, because when you come to another feature of Nietzsche's work, which I didn't mention, the transvaluation of all values, which is the essence of the Übermensch or Superman, it's about creating new values, which is about potentially creating a new ethics or morality, but not from the foundation of the Christian, Judeo-Christian version of right and wrong, and not drawing on a notion of absolute right and wrong out there. It's the creation of values from a position which rejects nihilism.
So, I mean, you might have heard me say, I've been banging on about it for long enough that I think a lot of postmodernist thought, probably inspired by Nietzsche, that there is no good and evil. I mean, I think that's
well, that's one kind of, one strand of it. Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I think that's what led to Trump, and that's what led to Brexit.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, all these things are possible, but this is where you get Trump. Well, we could look at Trump later. When Nietzsche talks about the last man, Trump is the last man, and it's against the last man that he poses the Übermensch. So he wouldn't have gone for Trump for all kinds of reasons. But I think, you've got to get into the diagnosis and the symptomology. So treat it forensically and look at these cases and analyze them for their inauthenticity and their nihilism, really. Because for him, Trump would be a nihilist. But I won't go into the reasons now because we'll have to do that later. It's quite a long, complicated thing. Now, there's several other people. There's Lisa and Niall I've got up here. Lisa, did you have a question or
point?
Yeah.
I was wanted to discuss about Nietzsche talking about how he believed music was the highest art form.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We haven't got to that yet.
Why he was so attracted to Wagner.
Yeah.
In the first place, and he puts that in opposition to visual art, which he sees as copy. I wonder if, when reading about this, if he sees music as the highest form and is some sort of otherworldly, spiritual.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, got you. Now it's like okay. The music, the birth of tragedy out of the spirit of music is the subtitle of his first book. But then later on he changes it to birth of tragedy and Hellenic pessimism. He switches, and the reason is this: in this early work, he's completely influenced by two figures: Wagner, because he worships his music at that point, and Schopenhauer, the philosopher, who did believe music was the perfection of all arts in many ways. You have to get into Schopenhauer's philosophy to get this, but Schopenhauer believed that there were really two aspects of existence: the representations of my mind, how I express them, like as Kant did, and the will. The will is this blind mechanical force that drives everything in the universe, and the only purpose of the will is to persevere and to repeat itself and to continue. It's not going anywhere, it's just continuing. And the only way you can reach a kind of perfection and escape from this rather pessimistic picture is through arts. And there are different kinds of arts. Visual art might represent the conflicts we have with our helplessness in this situation. But only music enables us to merge with it and still perceive it. I mean, this is a caricature of Schopenhauer's position, but he sees music as the perfect art form because it perfectly expresses the essence of the universe itself. So Nietzsche is at this stage very influenced by that, and that's very much what goes into the birth of tragedy, I'd say, like in brief. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, because Wagner built his opera house specifically for that. The whole essence of how that building was made was counter to how theatres had been previously built, which was that you had the eye on the stage. Obviously, Nietzsche was talking about the idea of bringing back the chorus. Yeah, was in
classical Greek.
So that communal aspect of the dynastic thing of being at one in community in that instance.
Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of the history of theatre and performance, that's absolutely right. Wagner is trying to create the total work of art. So he wants to get away from the more, sort of constrained proscenium theatre effects and create a total theatre, a total architecture. And the total architecture for him reflects the totality of music, because architecture, as Schopenhauer said, is frozen music, which is one way of looking at it, I suppose. So that's certainly true. And he also wants to bring back the chorus. And Nietzsche's point in The Birth of Tragedy is that the early playwrights like Aeschylus and Sophocles were very involved in the chorus, and the chorus just comes in and comments on the action all the way through. The chorus in that early tragedy drama is as important as any of the central characters, but it becomes less important when you get to Euripides, and this is why he sees him as decadent. And he wants to bring that back because the chorus represents that Dionysian principle of accepting the chaos, and also combining that with Schopenhauer's will to create that kind of perfect representation of the force of the universe through music. Now, he takes the idea of the will and turns it into the will to power, and it's not the same thing for reasons we'll have to leave this week, but I'll come to that. Sam, you've been waiting around. Yeah. What is it?
Hang on.
Yep.
Yeah, hi everybody. Brilliant to be here. I feel like my mind is like,
Good.
Have to have brandy afterwards to calm down.
Good. No, well, that's the way it should be with Nietzsche.
Yeah, thanks.
You're gone.
Charlie. Really amazing. And
Good. I'm
can
glad
you
you're
hear
enjoying
me?
it. Yeah, I can. Yeah. I mean, she'd get intoxicated by Nietzsche.
Yeah, I just.
Well,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I put my hand up just on a very flippant point, really, because I'm a musician and I create things.
Oh, you're dropping out. I keep on missing it. You've dropped out again, Sam. Yeah. We might have lost you vocally.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
No, you're going again.
Am I back in?
You're sort of in and out. It's very hard to hear you, though.
I think we'll have to leave it because I think
all right, come back to it. Come
out.
back to it next week. We're not going to leave music alone. We'll be coming back to it.
Okay.
Niall, did you want to say something before we're going to close up quite soon? You're right. Okay. Anybody want to? Oh, right. Oh, Sam, you're going to come back next week. We can call it a day if you like. There's quite a lot to take in. So next week, what I've called it. Come Let Us Kill the Spirit of Gravity with Laughter, which is from Zarathustra. What I'll do is, because you don't have to read long things here, although you can, I'm just going to select two, three short passages from probably The Gay Science, Zarathustra, and Human All Too Human, which you haven't got, which I'll find a copy for you. And I can put it up on River for next week, and then you can browse them. I'll probably do that over the weekend, so you've got a few days to look at them, but they're all quite short, so you can focus and concentrate, and then we'll play around with ideas of laughter. Why was laughter important to Nietzsche? And the body and the death of gods. And when Zarathustra goes to the marketplace and talks to the madman and the tightrope walkers, and he goes to a village called the Pied Cow, which I always think is quite strange. It sounds like a pub. And that's what happens to him. But anyway, we'll look at a little bit of Zarathustra as well next week. I think I need to stop because my voice is disappearing. I have to bring it back for the morning because I'm teaching something else, ethics, I think. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlie.
And we'll see you all again next week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Did you want to leave it on, Dan, or something? Did you say?
Just let me read these.
Yeah, okay. I'll leave it on, but I'll disappear. I'll turn it off in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Dan, what was you going to say? Was you going to make an announcement, or?
No, I just want to read the chat. I've got all these messages.
Right, I see.
Because I was telling you, I've been doing some stuff with Nora on a Tuesday. You said
yeah.
Some stuff with her. And I noticed at the end there were loads of messages, and I hadn't had a chance to read them. And then she closed the class.
Okay.
That was that.
I know what I was going to ask you. Are you doing John Thornton's class?
When does it start?
I'm not sure, but I think it's. In fact, because I was talking to Meg about. I said I'd help her do the admin, and she was saying John's class is 4 hours.
Right, is it?
And she thought it was a bit long, and my take on it was, well, I don't know. I mean, if he's offering that, maybe people will just make up their own breaks, or people will talk, or maybe, if it was me, I'd sort of say, well, put it down to the students. Ask students what they want. But basically, if he's offering 4 hours, then,
I suppose if it's on Zoom, you can just dip in and out, can't you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be on Zoom, because he didn't want to do it before on Zoom, did he? So,
do you know what it's about?
Yeah, it's about ideas. It's just basically, But Meg's putting the book together for Free University.
Well, I read about that. Is it? Do you know if it's anything to do with IT or computer?
No, not a clue. No.
I don't mean IT. I mean AI.
AI? No, I don't know, but I'd imagine it would be with being John. Yeah.
I don't mean the book. I mean the course.
Artificial intelligence. Yeah, I got that. Yeah.
So you got your phone back anyway?
Yeah, well, I did back from yours, didn't I, that day?
Yeah.
Yeah. McGarry phoned us as well about. Didn't he send you an email as well about getting in touch or something?
I don't know. I'll have a look.
Yeah. I didn't. I'll get hold of him. I'll copy you in or something anyway.
We were going to go over then. We didn't, did we?
That's right. And then he suggested a different time.
Yeah, he's got a problem with his.
So at some point I'll do that. But you're okay, are you?
I'm all right. Yeah.
Good.
Got rid of my muffs, I think. Touch wood.
Oh yeah. Fine. Okay.
All right.
I'll catch up with you soon anyway. But I'm gonna get some food because I'm.
See you soon. All right. Bye now.